He was a solitary tycoon, skeptical about love. She was a tireless single mom, worn down and doubting anyone could ever love her. He watched her exhausted or desperate with her son. Her vulnerability struck him. He perceived her dignity and strength. In that instant, the millionaire fell for the single mother, feeling an overwhelming desire to care for her and let her taste true love. Get ready for a twist where a tycoon challenges a single mother to believe in love. But high society in the past will try to destroy this union, and her dignity might heal all wounds. Watch this story to the end. You'll be amazed. If you like love stories and romance, subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing, the alarm clock went off at 5:30 in the morning, but Valentina Mendez had been awake for 10 minutes, staring at the ceiling of her small two-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. Not out of anxiety or insomnia, her body had grown accustomed to waking up even before the alarm, a defense mechanism developed over the past 5 years. Every extra minute was precious when you had a child to care for, a home to organize, and 2 jobs to hold down. She got up silently, her bare feet touching the cold apartment floor. In the bed beside her, Leo was sleeping soundly, his brown hair spread on the pillow, his angelic face relaxed. At 5 years old, he was her reason for living, her driving force, the explanation for every sacrifice she made. Valentina tucked the blanket more securely around her son and headed to the bathroom, where she took a quick and silent shower. The routine was always the same. Prepare breakfast, gently wake Leo, dress him in his school uniform while he was still half asleep, and then take him to school before heading to work. On the way, she always stopped at the drugstore to buy medication for her mother, Rose, who lived with them and took care of Leo in the afternoon when Valentina was at her second job. "Mom, are they having pizza in the cafeteria today?" Leo asked, rubbing his eyes as she tied his sneakers. "I don't know, sweetie, but you have your yummy lunch in your backpack," Valentina replied, kissing her son's forehead. Pizza at the cafeteria meant an extra $10 that she didn't have, but Leo didn't need to know that. At 7:30, after dropping Leo off at school, Valentina rode the subway downtown to the offices of Sterling Investments, where she had worked as an administrative assistant for 2 years. The mirrored building in the heart of Wall Street contrasted sharply with her modest neighborhood, but she had learned to navigate these two worlds without being intimidated. Meanwhile, on the 40th floor of the same building, Richard Sterling had already been in his office for an hour, reviewing financial reports and drinking his 3rd espresso of the day. At 39, he had built an empire that moved billions of dollars, but his personal life was an emotional wasteland. The glass walls of his office offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, but he rarely stopped to admire it. There was no time for contemplation when you managed a conglomerate of companies. The impeccable Italian suit, the Swiss watch that cost more than a used car, the imported mahogany desk, everything about him breathed power and success. But behind the piercing eyes and imposing posture, there was a man who had forgotten how to smile genuinely. His last few relationships had been calculated, women interested only in his fortune, confirming his belief that true love was a romantic myth. "Mr. Sterling, the meeting with the Japanese investors has been rescheduled for 10, his personal secretary informed him through the intercom. "Perfect. And did the Mendes reports arrive?" Valentina Mendez. The name had become familiar in recent months. She was the assistant who prepared the most organized and accurate reports in the entire company, always delivered on time, without errors. Richard didn't know her personally. He rarely went down to the lower floors, but he recognized efficiency when he saw it. It was then that fate decided to intervene. At 9:15 in the morning, Valentina was in the elevator, going up to personally deliver the monthly reports, a task she usually delegated. But her supervisor was out sick. Leo had had a fever the night before. She had slept only 3 hours, and her eyes were burning with fatigue. In her bag, she carried her mother's medication and a note from the school requesting a meeting about Leo's progress. Richard entered the elevator on the 35th floor, absorbed in an urgent call about an acquisition in Europe. He didn't notice the simply dressed woman in the corner of the elevator, brown hair tied back in a practical bun, holding a folder of documents against her chest. That's when the elevator stopped abruptly between the 36th and 37th floors. "Shit," Richard muttered, hanging up the phone and pressing the emergency button. The lights flickered and then stabilized, but the elevator remained still. Valentina felt her heart race. She couldn't be late. She had to deliver the reports, go home for lunch to give her mother her medication, and still get to her second job on time in the afternoon. Leo was counting on her to pick up the library books she had promised. "Must be a power surge. The generator will kick in a few minutes," Richard said, more to himself than to her, as he tried to make another call. No signal. It was then that he really noticed her for the first time. The woman was leaning against the wall, breathing in a controlled manner, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. There was something in her face, a determination mixed with vulnerability, that made him stop trying to use his cell phone. "You okay?" he asked, his voice losing its usual executive tone. Valentina looked up at him, and for a moment, Richard felt like he was seeing a real person for the first time in years. There was no financial interest in those brown eyes, no flattery or fear, just the genuine concern of a woman with responsibilities that couldn't wait. "I need to get out of here," she said simply. "I have people who depend on me." And in that elevator stuck between two floors, two completely different worlds began to come together in a way that would change their lives forever. The 27 minutes stuck in the elevator changed something fundamental between them, though neither wanted to admit it. Richard had discovered that the woman beside him was Valentina Mendez, the author of the impeccable reports that crossed his desk monthly. But more than that, he had discovered the person behind the efficiency. She spoke about Leo with a passion he hadn't seen in conversations about anything for years. She mentioned her mother, whom she cared for deeply, her second job at a diner, and how she managed to keep everything organized through detailed lists and almost military-like discipline. "Do you ever stop?" he had asked, genuinely curious. "Stopping is a luxury I can't afford," was her simple answer, but it carried the weight of a responsibility he had never experienced. When the elevator finally worked and the doors opened on the 40th floor, something had changed in the air between them. Richard held the doors as she exited, and for the first time in years, he hesitated before speaking. "The reports are always perfect," he said, and immediately felt inadequate. Was that all he had to offer? Professional compliments? Valentina turned, surprised. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." The formality created an instant barrier, reminding them of the distance that separated them. In the following days, Richard found himself paying attention to details that had previously gone unnoticed. He discovered that Valentina always arrived 15 minutes before her shift and left exactly on time, never a minute later. He learned through casual comments that she always ate lunch at the same cheap deli on the ground floor, usually just a sandwich, while reading something on her phone. For the first time, he went down to the 12th floor where the administrative department was located. The environment was completely different from his world. Simple desks, older computers, employees who clearly earned in a month what he spent on a single meal. Valentina was focused on a spreadsheet, a small wrinkle between her eyebrows, denoting total concentration. "Ms. Mendez," he said, and immediately the entire department fell silent. The presence of the CEO there was an extraordinary event. She looked up, clearly surprised and slightly alarmed. "Mr. Sterling, is there something wrong with the reports?" "No, they are perfect as always." He felt watched by all the employees around him. "Could you speak with me for a moment?" "In private?" Valentina's heart raced. Private conversations with the CEO rarely meant anything good for employees at her level. She followed him to a small conference room, her hands slightly trembling. "Sit down, please," Richard said, and for the first time she saw him without the armor of absolute power. There was something almost nervous in his posture. "I wanted to thank you personally for your work and ask if you are satisfied here." Satisfied? Valentina couldn't hide her confusion. Yes, sir, why?" Richard realized he had started the conversation completely wrong. What he really wanted was to get to know her better, but how to do that without sounding inappropriate? How to break the social barriers that separated them? "You mentioned in the elevator that you have a second job," he said, trying to sound casual. "Doesn't that make you feel overwhelmed?" Something changed in Valentina's face. The vulnerability he had seen in the elevator was quickly replaced by a defensive posture. "Oh, with all due respect, Mr. Sterling, my personal life does not interfere with my work here." "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. "I just care about the well-being of our employees." But the barrier was already up. Valentina stood up, polite but distant. "If there's nothing else about work, I need to get back to the reports. I have a deadline to meet." After she left, Richard remained alone in the room, realizing how he had messed everything up. He didn't know how to talk to someone without money and power being in the way. He didn't know how to be just a man interested in a woman without it seeming like abuse of authority. Valentina returned to her desk with a racing and confused heart. Why was the CEO interested in her life? Why did those blue eyes seem to see her in a way that made her feel exposed and at the same time strangely protected? She couldn't allow herself these thoughts. Men like Richard Sterling weren't genuinely interested in women like her, and if they were, it would be for the wrong reasons. That night, while helping Leo with his homework and preparing dinner for her mother, she tried to forget the conversation. But she couldn't stop thinking about the way he had asked if she was satisfied, as if he really cared about the answer. It was 3 days later that fate intervened again. Leo woke up with a high fever and vomiting. Valentina spent the night at the hospital, and when she arrived at work the next morning, she was clearly exhausted. She had missed the deadline for the monthly reports for the first time in 2 years. At 10 in the morning, Valentina's supervisor, Diana Santos, appeared at her desk with a serious expression. "Valentina, I need to talk to you." In the supervisor's office, Diana didn't waste time beating around the bush. "The reports are late." "This has never happened before." "I know, Diana. My son was sick, but I'm already finishing everything. They'll be ready in 2 hours. 2 hours that should have already been delivered to the 40th floor. Diana sighed. "Look, I like you, Valentina, but I can't make exceptions. I'm going to have to report the delay." Valentina's heart sank. She knew what that meant. A formal warning, possibly a deduction in salary, and a stain on her impeccable record. She couldn't lose this job. "Please, Diana, it was only once in 2 years. My hands are tied," Diana interrupted. "I've already notified management." An hour later, Valentina's phone rang. It was the CEO's secretary. "Ms. Mendez, Mr. Sterling would like to see you in his office. Now." As she rode the elevator, the same elevator where it had all started, Valentina knew her professional life was on the line. What she didn't know was that Richard had spent the entire morning thinking of a way to help her without seeming condescending, and that the delay had given him exactly the opportunity he was looking for. Richard Sterling's office on the 40th floor was a sanctuary of power and success. Valentina had never been there before, and for a moment she felt completely out of place among the expensive furniture, the panoramic view of the city, and the oppressive silence that only money could buy. Richard was standing in front of the window, his hands clasped behind his back, contemplating Manhattan below. "Please, have a seat," he said without turning around, his voice softer than she expected. Valentina remained standing, tense. "Mr. Sterling, about the delay in the reports, I can explain." "Your son was sick," he interrupted, finally turning around. The blue eyes she had learned to fear met hers with an unexpected gentleness. "I know because I spoke with the hospital. Acute gastritis, correct?" The shock rendered her speechless for a moment. "How did you—" "When I heard about the delay, I wanted to understand why." Richard approached slowly, as if he were dealing with a wounded animal. "Is Leo okay now?" The mention of her son's name completely disarmed her. No one in the company knew Leo's name. No one cared enough to ask. Yes, he's better. But I don't understand why you... Because in 2 years, you've never been late with a report. Not a comma out of place, not a deadline missed. When someone with that record slips up, there's an important reason. Richard stopped at a respectful distance, but his presence filled the space between them. "I want to offer a solution." Valentina raised her chin, her wounded dignity surfacing. "I don't need charity. It's not charity. It's mutual need." He returned to his desk, picked up a folder. "I need someone to coordinate a special project. Someone I trust completely to handle confidential information. The salary would be significantly higher and the hours more flexible." "Why me?" The question came out more aggressively than she intended, but Richard didn't seem bothered. "Because you're the only person in this company I see working with the same dedication as I do," he replied, with an honesty that caught her off guard. "And because—" he hesitated, running a hand through his dark hair. "Because you remind me that there are more important things than spreadsheets and profits." The silence that followed was charged with a tension that neither knew how to handle. Valentina felt her heart racing, not just because of the professional opportunity, but because of the way he was looking at her, as if he really saw her, not just as another employee. "What kind of project?" she asked finally. Richard opened the folder, revealing documents that clearly were worth millions. "I'm planning to create a foundation, investments in education and healthcare for low-income families. I need someone who understands these needs, not just theoretically." Valentina flipped through the papers, her eyes widening at the numbers and the scope of the project. "This is immense and personal," he admitted. "Very personal." She looked up at him, noticing something different in his expression. A vulnerability that didn't match the image of the ruthless CEO. "Why is it personal?" Richard moved away again, returning to the window. For a long moment, only the distant sound of traffic filled the silence. "My mother was a single mom," he said finally, his voice low. "Worked 3 jobs to support me until I got a scholarship. Died of exhaustion when I was 17. The words hit Valentina like a punch to the stomach. She had assumed he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, that he had never known hardship. The revelation completely changed the way she saw him. "I didn't know," she murmured. "Few do. I prefer that they continue to think I was born privileged." He turned, and for the first time she saw the wounded boy behind the powerful man. "But when I see you struggling the same way my mother struggled, running between jobs, worried about every penny, I remember her." Valentina felt tears burning her eyes. "Your father?" "Never met him. Just like Leo doesn't know his, I imagine." The casual mention of Leo's father made her stiffen instantly. It was a wound she kept carefully hidden, a chapter of her life she preferred to pretend never existed. "It's not the same situation," she said, more sharply than she intended. Richard noticed the immediate change in her posture. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Leo doesn't need a father. He has everything he needs." The words came out loaded with an old pain, a defensiveness that spoke of well-guarded secrets. "Of course he does," Richard said softly. "He has a mother who moves mountains for him." The compliment disarmed her again. How often had someone recognized her efforts? How often had someone seen her struggle as strength, not as failure? "The project," she managed to say, focusing on the documents to avoid looking into his eyes. "Why me, really?" "Because you understand what it's like to have responsibilities that can't wait. Because you know the value of every opportunity." He approached again, and this time she didn't back away. "And because I need someone to keep me honest, to remind me of the real goal behind the numbers." Valentina looked again at the papers. It was a unique opportunity, a chance to do something that really mattered. But it also meant working directly with Richard, and she could already feel the barriers she had built starting to crack. "The flexible hours," she said hesitantly. "You could take Leo to the doctor when you needed to. You could be present at school meetings. You could have a life beyond work." His voice carried a promise that she didn't know if she could believe. "And what do you get out of it?" Richard smiled for the first time since she had met him, a genuine smile that completely transformed his face. "A chance to do something my mother would be proud of." Valentina held the documents against her chest, feeling the weight of the decision. Accepting meant entering his world, working alongside the man who was already stirring her feelings in dangerous ways. But it also meant giving Leo opportunities that she could never offer alone. Can I take the documents home? Analyze them calmly? Of course. But Valentina... When she looked up, he was very close, close enough for her to perceive the subtle scent of his aftershave, the texture of his skin. It's not just about the work. You must know that. Her heart raced. She knew, God, how she knew. But acknowledging it meant opening doors that she had locked long ago. I need to pick up Leo from school, she said, fleeing the intensity of that moment. Obviously, he stepped back, returning to professional mode, but his eyes remained warm. Think carefully about the proposal. When Valentina left the office with the documents in her bag, she knew she wasn't just carrying papers. She was carrying the possibility of a completely different life and the fear that she might not deserve so much happiness. 3 days after the conversation in the office, Valentina still hadn't given an answer about the proposal. The documents remained on her kitchen table, read and reread, as she weighed the pros and cons of a decision that could change her life. Leo had asked twice why Mommy was thinking so hard, and she didn't know how to explain that she was considering accepting help from a man who made her question everything she believed about herself. It was on a rainy Thursday in March that fate made the decision for her. Valentina was in the middle of a budget meeting when her cell phone vibrated insistently. Normally she would ignore it, but Leo's school had instructions to call only in emergencies. She apologized and answered, feeling her blood run cold when she heard the secretary's nervous voice. Ms. Mendez, it's about Leo. He fainted during gym class. We've already called an ambulance. The world stopped. Valentina stood up so quickly that she knocked over her chair. Fainted. He was fine this morning. We don't know. He was running and suddenly he just collapsed. We can't seem to wake him up properly. Please come quickly. Which hospital? Valentina was already leaving the room, ignoring the confused looks from her colleagues. I'm on my way. New York Presbyterian. Ms. Mendez, The call dropped. Valentina ran down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. Leo was everything to her, her reason for existing. She couldn't lose her son. She couldn't. In the elevator, her hands trembled so much that she could barely press the button for the ground floor. When the doors opened, she ran towards the exit, but stopped abruptly when she realized that it was raining torrentially outside. She didn't have money for a cab. The bus would take forever in traffic and... Valentina? She turned and saw Richard coming out of another elevator, clearly returning from a business lunch. He saw her and immediately realized that something was terribly wrong. Her face was pale, her eyes glazed with panic. What happened? He approached quickly. Leo, my son, hospital. The words came out in gasps between sobs that she was trying to contain. He fainted at school. I need to get there, but it's raining and I don't have... Richard didn't hesitate for even a second. Let's go. My car's in the garage. No, I can't accept. Valentina. His voice was firm but gentle. It's your son. Let's go. He guided her to the garage, where a driver was waiting next to a black BMW. Richard opened the door for her and gave quick instructions to the driver about the hospital, asking him to use the emergency siren that the executive car possessed. During the ride, Valentina couldn't stop trembling. He was fine this morning, she mumbled repeatedly. He ate breakfast, played in the bath. How could he have fainted? Richard, sitting next to her, watched her with a concern that went beyond professional courtesy. Without thinking, he reached out and covered her hand with his. He's going to be okay. Kids are tougher than we think. You don't understand, she said, the tears finally falling. He's all I have. If I lose Leo... You won't. The certainty in Richard's voice surprised her. I won't let you. At the hospital, Richard not only accompanied her to the reception desk, but he used his influence to ensure that they were seen immediately. While Valentina filled out the forms with trembling hands, he spoke discreetly with the administration, ensuring that Leo would have the best possible care. Our family of Leo Mendez? Called a nurse. I'm his mother, Valentina said, standing up quickly. Are you also a relative? Asked the nurse, looking at Richard. There was a moment of hesitation, and then Richard replied, I'm a very close friend of the family. They were taken to a room where Leo was conscious but pale, with an IV in his arm. Upon seeing his mother, his eyes filled with tears. "Mommy, I was scared," he said in a small voice. Valentina ran to the side of the bed, kissing her son's face repeatedly. "It's okay, sweetie. Mommy's here. Who's he?" Leo looked curiously at Richard, who had remained discreetly near the door. Valentina looked at Richard, not knowing how to explain. It was he who approached the bed with a gentle smile. "Hi, Leo. I'm Richard, a friend of your mom. I heard you weren't feeling well. I fainted in front of everyone," Leo said, embarrassed. "It was so lame." "It happens to the best of us," Richard replied, sitting down in the chair next to the bed. "I once fainted during an important presentation." "Imagine the embarrassment," Leo laughed, and Valentina felt something stir in her chest as she saw how Richard interacted naturally with her son. The doctor arrived with the test results. "It was just severe hypoglycemia," he explained. "He needs to eat at smaller intervals and avoid physical exertion until we regulate his diet." Hypoglycemia. Valentina knew exactly what that meant. Leo was starving and she hadn't even realized it. The savings at the supermarket, the meager breakfasts, the simple dinners, all because of the bills that were piling up. The guilt hit her like a slap. What kind of mother was she? "A doctor," said Richard. "What exactly are the dietary recommendations?" While the doctor explained about the need for regular meals, snacks between main meals, and nutritional follow-up, Valentina saw the costs accumulating mentally. How would she pay for all of this? After the doctor left, Richard approached her. "Valentina, you need to accept help." "I can't," she began, but he interrupted her. "It's not about you. It's about him." Richard looked at Leo, who was playing with a teddy bear that a nurse had brought. "A child can't pay for the pride of adults." The words hurt because they were true. Valentina looked at her son, her brave and loving boy, and realized that her stubbornness was putting Leo at risk. "Is the proposal still valid?" she asked softly. "Always," he replied immediately. "Then I accept." The smile that lit up Richard's face was genuine and transformative. But neither of them realized that the nurse who had left the room moments before was the cousin of Diana Santos, Valentina's supervisor, and that she had overheard the entire conversation about proposals and financial help. 2 hours later, when they left the hospital with Leo already discharged, Richard insisted on taking them home. In the car, Leo fell asleep in Valentina's lap, exhausted from the day's scare. "Thank you," she said softly, looking out the window at the familiar streets of her neighborhood, "for everything." "You don't need to thank me." Richard watched Leo sleep, a tender expression on his face. "He's a special boy. He's all I have." "Not anymore," he said, meeting her eyes in the reflection of the window. "Now you have us too." The use caught her off guard. When had it become us? When had he started to consider her part of something bigger? When they arrived at the simple building where she lived, Richard helped her carry the sleeping Leo to the apartment. It was the first time he really saw how she lived. The small space, but carefully arranged with love, the simple but clean furniture. The photos of Leo spread everywhere. "It's humble," she said, slightly embarrassed. "It's a home," he corrected, "full of love." When they put Leo to bed, the boy woke up briefly. "Is Richard staying for dinner?" he asked sleepily. Valentina blushed. "Leo, Mr. Sterling has important things to do." "Actually," Richard interrupted, "I'd love to stay, if you don't mind." And so it was, on a rainy Thursday, sharing a simple dinner of omelets and toast, that Richard Sterling discovered what it really meant to be home. And Valentina discovered that maybe she deserved to be happy after all. What neither of them knew was that the next morning, Diana Santos would be on the phone with human resources reporting inappropriate behavior between an executive and an employee, and that their lives were about to become complicated in ways they never imagined. Ooh. In the 3 weeks following the episode at the hospital, Valentina's life changed in ways she never thought possible. The new position as coordinator of the foundation project brought not only a salary that allowed her to buy fresh fruit for Leo without calculating every penny, but also a closeness to Richard that became more dangerous every day. They worked together every afternoon in his office, reviewing plans for schools, clinics, and job training programs. Valentina discovered that behind the ruthless businessman was a man passionately committed to the idea of giving other families the opportunities that he and his mother never had. And Richard discovered that Valentina's intelligence went far beyond impeccable organization. She had insights into the needs of underserved communities that no expensive consultant could offer. "If we put the clinic here," she said, pointing to the map of the Bronx spread out on his desk, "mothers can take their children after school without missing half a day of work." Richard watched her as she spoke, the passion lighting up her brown eyes. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been that mother." "I still am." She smiled and he felt something squeeze in his chest. "When Leo was little and needed to go to the doctor, I had to choose between missing work or leaving him sick. It's not a choice that any mother should have to make." Moments like that became constant. Small, accidental touches when they passed documents to each other. Glances that lasted a second longer than necessary. The way he said her name, always soft, always affectionate. The way she smiled when he told stories about Leo, who had become a regular visitor to the office in the late afternoons. But it was exactly that proximity that was drawing unwanted attention. Diana Santos had spent weeks gathering information, conversations with cleaning staff who had seen Richard leave the building late at night with Valentina. The story of the hospital, which had spread through the hallways with dramatic additions. The fact that Valentina now ate lunch in the executive restaurant on the 40th floor when before she barely had money for a sandwich. "It's not natural," Diana commented with other supervisors during coffee break. "An administrative assistant doesn't become a project coordinator overnight, unless she's offering more than professional competence." The gossip reached the ears of Robert Sterling, Richard's father and chairman of the company's board of directors. At 72, Robert had built the family empire through strategic alliances and convenient marriages, and he didn't look favorably on what he considered an inappropriate affair of his son's. It was on a grey Monday that everything began to fall apart. Richard was in his office when Robert entered without knocking. The older man, still imposing despite his age, closed the door and stood before his son's desk with a stern expression. "We need to talk," Robert said without preamble. "About what?" Richard looked up from the foundation documents, but something in his father's tone made him alert. "About Valentina Mendes." Richard's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral. "What about her?" "Do you think I'm an idiot?" Robert approached, placing his hands on the desk. "Do you believe I don't know what's going on?" "I don't know what you're talking about. An employee from the 12th floor is suddenly working directly with you. She gets a substantial raise. She's seen leaving the building with you. And now I find out that you went to the hospital with her when her son got sick." Robert straightened, crossing his arms. "Either you take me for an idiot, or you're more emotionally involved than you should be." Richard stood up, his jaw tight. "Valentina is an exceptional professional. The foundation project needs someone with her experience and sensitivity." "Sensitivity?" Robert laughed bitterly. "Is that what they call it now?" Be careful," Richard said, his voice dangerously low. "You're talking about an honest and hard-working woman. I'm talking about an opportunist who saw a chance and took it." Robert walked to the window. "She's a single mother, Richard. Women in that situation are experts in using their children to awaken protective instincts in rich and lonely men." "Enough!" Richard slammed his hand on the desk. "I won't allow you to talk about her like that." Robert turned, a cruel smile on his lips. "So it's true. You've gotten involved with an employee, with a single mother who has nothing to offer but problems. She has more class and dignity than any of the socialites you want me to meet. Class and dignity don't generate million-dollar mergers or open doors in the international market." Robert returned to the desk, leaning over it. "You have responsibilities, Richard. To the company, to the family, to the Sterling name. And to my own happiness? Happiness is a luxury men in our position can't afford. Robert straightened his jacket. Especially when that happiness can destroy decades of work. What are you talking about? Robert smiled coldly. Marcia Esteves called yesterday. Richard felt his stomach drop. Marcia Esteves was the daughter of one of the company's largest investors, and there was a tacit expectation that they would marry to strengthen the partnership between the families. She's returning from Paris next month, Robert continued. Her father is eager to formalize certain partnerships. I'm not marrying Marcia. Yes, you are. Because if you don't, the Esteves will withdraw their investment from the company. And when that happens, I'll make sure everyone knows it was because of a whim of yours with an employee, including Valentina herself. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Richard knew his father well enough to know that he would keep his promise. You wouldn't do that. I would and I will. The choice is yours, son. The company and the family we built, or an affair with a woman who will destroy everything we've worked for. Robert headed to the door, but stopped before leaving. Oh, and Richard, as of today, Ms. Mendes will be transferred back to her original duties. The foundation project will be cancelled until you regain your senses. When the door closed, Richard sank into his chair, his hands in his hair. How could he protect Valentina without destroying everything he had built? How could he choose between the love that was blossoming and the company that was the legacy of generations? 2 hours later, Valentina received a call from Diana Santos. Valentina, I need you to come down to my office immediately. In Diana's office, Valentina found not only the supervisor, but also the HR director, Carlos Mendonça. Have a seat, please, Carlos said, his expression serious. We've received some complaints about inappropriate behavior. Inappropriate behavior? Valentina felt her heart race. Improper relationship with superiors. Use of position to obtain personal advantages. Diana couldn't hide the malicious satisfaction in her voice. There are reports that you're involved personally with the CEO. That's absurd, Valentina said, but her voice trembled. Is it? Carlos opened a folder. Then can you explain why you were promoted without a selection process? Why the CEO took you to the hospital personally? Why are you having access to confidential information that employees at your level should never see? Valentina realized that she was in a trap. Any explanation she gave would only confirm the suspicions. My work has always been impeccable. No one is questioning your professional competence, Carlos said. We're questioning the methods used to obtain certain opportunities. Until the investigation is completed, Diana interrupted, you are suspended. Without pay, Valentina's world collapsed. Suspended without pay meant not being able to pay the bills, her mother's medication, Leo's school. It meant returning to the desperation that she had left behind. Please, she said, her dignity fighting against despair, I need this job. I have responsibilities. You should have thought about that before getting involved with whom you shouldn't, Diana said coldly. When Valentina left the building an hour later, carrying her few personal belongings in a box, she knew that she wasn't just losing a job. She was losing Richard. She was losing the hope of a better life. She was losing everything she had begun to dream of. What she didn't know was that 3 floors above, Richard was fighting the most important battle of his life, desperately trying to find a way to save her without destroying himself in the process. And that Robert Sterling had already begun to spread rumors in social circles of the New York elite about the inappropriate affair of the Sterling heir with a gold digger who used her son to awaken pity. The war had begun, and Valentina didn't even know that she was the target. The bomb exploded on a Thursday, exactly 1 week after Valentina's suspension, through the society pages of the most widely read newspaper in New York City. Scandal in the business world. Sterling heir involved with subordinate employee, screamed the headline. accompanied by grainy but undeniably recognizable photos of Richard and Valentina leaving the hospital together, him helping her carry Leo, the two of them talking intensely in his office through the glass walls. Valentina found out when her neighbor, Mrs. Davis, knocked on her door holding the newspaper with a mixed expression of shock and concern. "Honey, is this you?" asked the older woman, holding out the paper. Valentina's heart stopped when she saw the photos. The article was cruel and detailed. Sources close to the Sterling family confirmed that Richard Sterling, CEO of one of the largest conglomerates in the country, is having an improper relationship with Valentina Mendez, an administrative assistant of humble origins and a single mother. The executive allegedly used his position to promote the employee and grant her benefits not available to other employees. But the worst was yet to come. Marcia Estevez, heiress of the Estevez Group and Richard's former girlfriend, returned from Paris last week, and exclusive sources confirm that the couple rekindled their relationship, definitively ending what would only be a passing fling of the businessman. "Richard has always been a responsible man," declared a source close to the family. "He would never compromise his future and that of the company for a momentary whim." The article was accompanied by a recent photo of Richard and Marcia together in an elegant restaurant, she wearing an engagement ring that sparkled even in the grainy photograph. Valentina sat heavily on the kitchen chair, the newspaper trembling in her hands. Leo was at school, thank God. She wouldn't know how to explain that to her 5-year-old son, who had become accustomed to asking when Uncle Richard would come to visit them again. The phone rang insistently throughout the morning. Journalists wanting statements, curious neighbors, even strangers who had gotten her number. Valentina hung up the phone and closed the curtains, trying to hide from the world that suddenly seemed determined to destroy her. That's when there was a knock on the door with an insistence that she couldn't ignore. "Valentina, open up. It's me." Richard's voice on the other side of the door made her jump as if she had been electrocuted. She hesitated, her heart beating erratically before opening it slowly. He was different, his face tense, his eyes red as if he hadn't slept, his suit rumpled. When he saw the newspaper on the table behind her, he closed his eyes briefly. "You saw it," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I saw it." Valentina's voice came out colder than she intended. "Congratulations on the engagement." Richard turned quickly. "It's not true. The engagement, I mean. Marcia, my father. They forced me to have dinner with her yesterday. I didn't know there were photographers." "Forced?" The word came out loaded with incredulity. "You're 39 years old, Richard. No one forces you to do anything. You don't understand. My father threatened to withdraw the Estevez investment from the company. That would mean firing hundreds of employees, including you when you return from the suspension." "How convenient," Valentina said, crossing her arms. "There's always a business excuse when it comes to choosing between money and the rest. It's not like that." Richard approached, but she backed away. "Valentina, I came here to explain, to find a solution." "A solution?" She laughed bitterly. "The solution has already been found. It's in the newspaper for everyone to see. The heir returns to his princess, and the inconvenient employee disappears. You're not inconvenient. You're..." He hesitated, running his hands through his hair. "You're everything to me." "Am I?" Valentina picked up the newspaper, opening it to the article. "Because here it says I was just a passing fling, a momentary whim. I never said those words." "But you also didn't deny them publicly, did you?" Her voice rose. "When was the last time you stood up to your father? When was the last time you chose what you really wanted instead of what was expected of you?" Richard opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't find the words. The painful truth was that he had always given in to family pressures, had always chosen the path that preserved the family's business and reputation. "That's what I thought," Valentina said softly. "You can convince yourself that you love me, Richard, but you don't love me enough to fight for me." "That's not true." "No." She walked to the window, looking at the street where some neighbors were gathered, clearly discussing the scandal. "Then why am I suspended from work? Why is my name being dragged through the mud in the newspapers, while yours remains intact?" Why are you engaged to someone else? I'm not engaged to anyone. The photo was taken out of context. Valentina turned to face him, and Richard saw something break in her eyes. Do you know what the difference is between us, Richard? When Leo was in the hospital, when I needed to choose between my pride and my son's well-being, I swallowed my pride. I accepted your help. Because when you truly love someone, you make sacrifices. I am making sacrifices. Are you? Her voice was dangerously calm now. Because it seems to me that the only sacrifice you're not willing to make is the only one that matters. Giving up your golden world to live in mine. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard knew that she was right. He had grown up with the certainty that it was possible to have everything. The love, the company, the approval of the family. But life was forcing him to choose, and at the moment of decision, his corporate instincts had prevailed. Valentina, he began, but she raised her hand. No, enough. She walked to the door, opening it. I made a mistake in believing that someone like you could really love me. Men like you don't love women like me. You have fun with us. You feel virtuous by helping us, but when it comes time to choose, you always choose the safety of your world. That's not fair. Fair? Valentina laughed, but there was no humor in the laughter. Fair would be me not being suspended while you continue your life as normal. Fair would be my son not having to see his mother being called a gold digger in the newspapers. Fair would be you having defended me publicly instead of letting your father and your advisors turn me into a villain. Richard approached the door, desperate. Give me a chance to fix this. Give me time. Time. Valentina shook her head. I don't have time, Richard. I have a son to support, bills to pay, a life to rebuild. I can't stay waiting for you to decide if I'm worth fighting for. What if I give up everything? The company, the money, everything? For a moment, Valentina's face softened. But then she shook her head sadly. You won't give up anything. And deep down, you know that. Just like I know. Valentina, please, go to your fiancé, Richard. Her voice was broken but firm. Go to your life as always. And let me rebuild mine. When the door closed between them, they both knew that it wasn't just the end of the conversation. It was the end of everything that could have been. Outside the apartment, Richard stood for long minutes, his hand on the doorknob, knowing that on the other side of the door was the woman who had become his reason for living. But also knowing that she was right, he wasn't brave enough to give up everything for her. Inside, Valentina slid down the door to the floor, finally allowing the tears to fall. She had lost her job, her dignity, and the man she loved. All that remained was the painful certainty that she had been right from the start. Women like her didn't deserve happy endings. 2 hours later, when Leo arrived from school asking why Mommy was crying, Valentina had to find strength that she didn't know she still possessed to explain that sometimes adults got sad, but that everything would be okay. She was lying, of course. Nothing was okay, and she didn't know if anything ever would be again. Ooh. 3 weeks had passed since Valentina had closed the door in Richard's face, and life had become a daily battle for survival. The little money she had saved was running out quickly. The bills were piling up, her mother's medications needed to be rationed, and Leo had started asking why they couldn't buy yogurt at the supermarket anymore. Valentina had knocked on the door of dozens of companies, but her reputation preceded her. That one who got involved with the boss was how they knew her now. Some interviews were cancelled at the last minute. In others, she saw the recognition in the eyes of the interviewers when they connected her face to the photos in the newspapers. It was on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, while returning from yet another unsuccessful interview, that Valentina decided to stop running and start fighting. The decision came when she saw Leo playing on the living room floor with old toy cars, pretending they were rich people's cars like Uncle Richard's. Her son's innocence, who still asked when Mommy's friend would come to visit them again, broke her heart. But it also ignited something inside her, a fury that she didn't know she possessed. She wasn't a passive victim. She was an intelligent, competent woman who had been systematically destroyed by powerful people who saw her happiness as a threat. And if there was one thing that her years as a single mother had taught her, it was that when someone threatens your family, you fight with all your might. Valentina picked up the old laptop she used to look for jobs and started researching. Not about job openings, but about the Sterling family, about Robert, about Marcia Esteves. If they had used information to destroy her, she needed information to defend herself. The first discovery came through a former college classmate who worked as an investigative journalist. Clara Ribeiro had called 2 days after the scandal offering support, but Valentina had hung up, too ashamed to talk. Now she called back. "Clara, it's Valentina Mendez. Valentina, good to hear from you. How are you?" "Destroyed, to be honest. But that's not why I'm calling." Valentina took a deep breath. "You said there was something strange about the article about me and Richard. What did you mean?" Clara lowered her voice. "Can I meet you in person? There are things I can't talk about over the phone." They met at a discreet coffee shop downtown. Clara arrived with a folder full of documents and a worried expression. "Valentina, you need to know that it was a setup from the beginning," Clara said bluntly. "I investigated the source of the article. The photos were taken by a private detective hired by Robert Sterling more than a month ago." Valentina's blood ran cold. "A month? But he'd been investigating you since he found out about his son's interest. He has a complete file on your life. Where you live, where you work, Leo's school, even your mother's medical history." Clara opened the folder, showing grainy photos. "Look at this." There were dozens of photographs. Valentina leaving work, picking up Leo at school, at the supermarket, at the drugstore, all dated weeks before the episode at the hospital. "My God," Valentina murmured. "He was spying on me. Not only that, I found out that Robert Sterling has direct connections with 3 members of the editorial board of the newspaper that published the article. The story was planted deliberately." Valentina flipped through the documents, her anger growing with each page. "And Diana Santos? Your former supervisor," Clara smiled bitterly. "She received a substantial promotion 2 weeks after your suspension. Interesting coincidence, don't you think? He bought her off. He bought off several people. But here's what's most interesting." Clara pointed to a specific document. "Robert Sterling doesn't have as much control over the company as he makes it seem. Richard owns 45% of the shares. Robert only has 25%. The rest is divided among smaller investors. So the threat to withdraw the Esteves investment was real, but it wouldn't be enough to destroy the company. Robert was bluffing, betting that his son wouldn't investigate the numbers." Valentina leaned back in her chair, processing the information. Richard had given up on her based on a lie. Robert had manipulated both of them, using fear and misinformation to separate them. "There's more," Clara continued. "Marcia Esteves didn't return from Paris out of love. The Esteves group is going bankrupt. They desperately need the marriage to Richard to save the family business." "How did you find all this out?" "And I have my sources. And I also discovered something about you that Robert clearly didn't know when he had you investigated." Clara smiled for the first time. "You have more powerful allies than you imagine." Clara opened another folder and showed an official document. "Remember your first job after college? At the law firm of Andrade and Associates." "Of course. I worked there for 2 years before Leo was born. You worked directly for Helena Andrade, one of the most respected lawyers in the country. And guess who called me yesterday, after seeing the article about you?" Valentina's eyes widened. "Ms. Andrade?" "The same. She said she always remembered you as one of the most competent and honest employees she ever had. When she saw your name in the newspapers, she knew immediately that something was wrong." Clara leaned forward. "She wants to help. Pro bono, Helena Andrade." Valentina remembered the elegant and intelligent woman who had been her boss years ago. A lawyer who never lost a case and who had built her career defending people like Valentina, the weak against the powerful. She would really do that? She already has. She got a restraining order preventing more articles about you from being published without concrete evidence. And she's preparing a lawsuit for moral damages against Robert Sterling and the newspaper. For the first time in weeks, Valentina felt a glimmer of hope. But is that enough? It's a start. But Valentina, Clara hesitated. Helena said she needs to talk to you in person. There are other things she's discovered. Things that could completely change the game. That afternoon, Valentina met at the elegant office of Helena Andrade in the same building where she had worked years ago. The lawyer, now in her 50s, greeted her with a warm smile and a tight hug. Valentina, dear, I'm sorry for what they did to you. Miss Andrade, I don't even know how to thank you. You don't have to. We're here to do justice. Helena led her to a conference room where other lawyers were waiting. But before we begin, there's something you need to know about Robert Sterling. Helena opened a thick file on the table. In the last few days, we investigated his history, and we discovered a pattern. You're not the first woman he's destroyed to protect the family interests. Valentina flipped through the documents, seeing names, photos, stories. Women who had gotten involved with men of the Sterling family over the years. All with the same ending: fabricated scandals, destroyed reputations, ruined lives. One of them, said Helena, pointing to a photo, was Isabella Montero, Richard's girlfriend 8 years ago. She couldn't take the pressure and moved abroad. Richard never mentioned, because he probably doesn't know the full extent of his father's manipulation. Robert is an expert in making it seem like women give up of their own free will. Helena leaned over the table. But here's what Robert wasn't expecting. Isabella decided to return to the United States. And she wants to testify in your favor. Valentina's heart raced. Testify? About Robert's methods. About how he manipulates situations to drive away women he considers unsuitable for the family. Helena smiled. Valentina, you're not just going to defend yourself. You're going to expose Robert Sterling for who he really is. But what about Richard? He's going to hate all this. Helena became serious. That's a decision you need to make. Fighting for justice may mean losing Richard definitively. Or it may mean saving him from his father's manipulations. I can't guarantee what the result will be. Valentina looked out the window, seeing the city below. Somewhere, Richard was probably in meetings, making decisions that would affect thousands of people. Leah was at school, innocent of all the war that was unfolding around him. Robert was in his office thinking he had won, but they didn't know the strength of a mother fighting for her son, for her dignity, for her chance at happiness. When do we start? She asked, meeting Helena's eyes. The lawyer smiled. Early tomorrow morning. The lawsuit against Robert Sterling will be filed at 9 in the morning, and at 10, we'll hold a press conference to expose the whole truth. That night, alone at home after putting Leo to sleep, Valentina looked at the phone, tempted to call Richard and warn him about what was coming, but she didn't. If he truly loved her, he would find out for himself what was happening. And if he didn't love her enough to fight when he knew the truth, then she would be better off without him. The war was just beginning, and this time, Valentina was ready to win. Oh! The press conference was scheduled for 10 in the morning on a Thursday, but by 8:30, the auditorium at Helena Andrade's office was already packed with journalists. The news that there would be bombshell revelations about Robert Sterling had spread quickly through specialized media circles. Valentina was backstage, her heart pounding erratically. She wore a simple but elegant suit that Helena had insisted on buying for her, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like the competent and dignified woman she had always been. "Ready?" asked Helena, adjusting the papers on the podium. "More than ever," replied Valentina, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. At the same moment, 12 miles away, Richard was in his office reading the morning newspapers when his secretary rushed in. "Mr. Sterling, there's a press conference being broadcast live about you and your family." Richard looked up, confused. "What press conference?" The secretary turned on the television, and Richard's heart stopped when he saw Valentina at the podium, flanked by Helena Andrade and other lawyers. She was more beautiful than he remembered, but there was something different about her, a determination he had never seen before. "Good morning," began Helena, We are here today to expose a systematic campaign of defamation and manipulation orchestrated by Robert Sterling against women who dared to have relationships with members of his family. The press room exploded in murmurs. Richard turned up the volume, feeling the world spinning around him. Helena continued, presenting meticulously organized evidence. The photos from the private investigation, the payments to Diana Santos, the connections to the newspaper that published the article, the history of other women destroyed by the same methods over the years. Isabella Montero, said Helena, was one of those victims. She's here with us today to testify. Isabella stepped up to the podium, an elegant woman in her 40s whom Richard recognized immediately. His first serious girlfriend, who had disappeared from his life 8 years ago without convincing explanations. Robert Sterling threatened me directly, said Isabella, her voice clear and firm. He said he would destroy my career and that of my family if I didn't end the relationship with Richard. When I hesitated, articles began to appear in the newspapers questioning my professional reputation. Clients canceled contracts. Friends avoided me. Richard felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. All the times his father had predicted that Isabella wasn't suitable for him. All the coincidences that led to the end of the relationship. It had all been orchestrated. And now, continued Isabella, he did the same thing with Valentina Mendez. But this time, we decided to fight. Then it was Valentina's turn to speak. She approached the microphone, and Richard saw her hands tremble slightly before steadying. I fell in love with Richard Sterling, she said, and the raw honesty of her voice completely silenced the room. Not for the money, not for the social position, but for the man he is when no one is watching. The man who genuinely cares about other people, who dreams of using his fortune to help those in need, who plays with toy cars on the floor with a 5-year-old boy. Richard felt tears burning his eyes. But Robert Sterling decided that a single mother like me was not worthy of his son. So he investigated me, spied on me, planted false articles, and destroyed my reputation. He made my 5-year-old son see his mother being called a gold digger in the newspapers. Valentina's voice hardened. Well, today is the day it stops, Helena resumed the podium. We are filing a lawsuit for defamation, invasion of privacy, and conspiracy against Robert Sterling. We are also suing the newspaper that published articles based on fabricated information. And any media outlet that continues to repeat these lies will face the same legal consequences. The press conference continued for another hour, with journalists asking questions and more evidence being presented. But Richard had stopped listening. He was running through the hallways of the building, going up to his father's floor. Robert was in his office, also watching the press conference with a grim expression. "What the hell have you done?" Richard roared, entering without knocking. Robert turned off the television calmly. "I protected our family as I always do." "Protected?" Richard slammed both hands on the desk. "You destroyed the woman I love." "You thought you loved," Robert corrected coldly. "Just like you thought you loved Isabella." "Isabella?" Richard straightened up. "You destroyed Isabella too. I saved you from making the same mistake twice." "Mistake?" Richard's voice was dangerously low. "The only mistake here was believing that you had my best interests in mind." Robert stood up, trying to regain control of the situation. "Richard, you're emotional. When you calm down." "When I calm down?" Richard laughed bitterly. "Dad, you've manipulated my entire life. How many other women? How many other decisions have you made for me without me knowing? All the decisions necessary to guarantee your future. My future or your legacy?" The two men stared at each other across the desk, years of unresolved tension finally coming to the surface. "Do you want to know what the difference is between me and you, Dad?" said Richard finally. "When I make a mistake, I take the consequences. When you make a mistake, you destroy other people to hide your guilt. If you go after that woman now, after all this public exposure, you'll destroy our reputation for good." "Our reputation?" Richard walked towards the door. "You've already done that yourself, Richard!" Robert shouted as his son reached the door. If you walk out that door, don't come back." Richard stopped, his hand on the doorknob. For a moment, Robert thought he had won. "You're right," Richard said softly. "I won't." And he left, leaving Robert alone with the consequences of his manipulations. 2 hours later, Valentina was at home, emotionally exhausted by the intense morning, when she heard insistent knocks on the door. She thought it was another journalist and hesitated to open it, but the knocks continued. "Valentina, it's me. Please open up." Richard's voice caught her completely off guard. She opened the door slowly, finding him in the hallway with red eyes, rumpled suit, the expression of a man who had lost everything and found what really mattered. "I saw the press conference," he said before she could speak. "Richard, no." He raised his hand. "Let me talk first, please." She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Leo was at school, so they were alone in the small apartment that suddenly seemed charged with all the history between them. "You were right," he said, standing in the middle of the room as if he didn't know where to stand. "About everything. I didn't have the courage to fight for you when I needed to. I chose the easy path, the safety of my world, instead of fighting for what I really wanted. Richard, I didn't know," he continued, his voice breaking, "about my father, about Isabella, about what he did to you. But that's no excuse. I should have questioned. I should have investigated. I should have trusted you instead of trusting him." Valentina felt tears burning her eyes. "And now, after everything that's come to light?" Richard approached slowly, as if he were approaching something precious that could break. "Now I want to do what I should have done weeks ago. I want to fight for you, for us, for Leo. Your family will never accept. My family is me, you, and Leo, if that's what you want." He stopped in front of her, not daring to touch her yet. "I quit the company today. I cut ties with my father. I cancelled anything he had arranged with the Esteves." Valentina stared at him, incredulous. "You did what?" "I gave up everything." He smiled for the first time, and it was like the sun rising after a storm. "Turns out I have enough shares to start my own investment firm. And I already know what my first project will be." "What?" "The foundation we planned together. Only now it will be for real, without external interference, without power games." He finally raised his hand, gently touching her face. "If you'll allow me to work with you again." "Richard," she whispered, closing her eyes to his touch. "What if it doesn't work out? What if we discover that we're too different? Then at least we'll know that we tried. For real this time." He leaned in, resting his forehead against hers. "Valentina, I love you. Not as an executive infatuated with an employee, not as a rich man having fun with a commoner. I love you as a man who found his soulmate and almost lost her because of cowardice." "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming out as both a confession and a promise. When they kissed, it was as if the world was finally back on its axis. All the suffering, all the separation, all the pain of the past weeks dissolved in the warmth of that embrace. They were interrupted by the arrival of Leo, who was returning from school with Rose. "Uncle Richard!" shouted the boy, running into the arms of the man he had missed so much. "You're back!" "I'm back, champ," said Richard, lifting Leo into his arms. "And this time it's for good, if your mother lets me." Leo looked at Valentina with shining eyes. "Let him, Mommy, please." Valentina laughed through her tears. "I think I can consider it." 6 months later, the Sterling Mendes Foundation inaugurated its first clinic in the Bronx, exactly in the location that Valentina had suggested that day in the office that seemed like an eternity ago. The ceremony was simple but moving, with dozens of families from the community participating. "Now," said Richard at the makeshift microphone, "I would like to call to the stage the general coordinator of the foundation, my partner in every sense of the word, Valentina Mendes." Applause echoed through the clinic courtyard. Valentina stepped onto the small stage, radiant in a simple but elegant dress, an engagement ring sparkling on her left hand. "When I was little," she began, "my mother always said that sometimes life knocks us down to show us how strong we are when we get back up. Today, looking at you, at this clinic, at the man who chose to fight with me instead of against me, I know that she was right. In the audience, Leo applauded enthusiastically in Rose's lap, who had become an official part of the extended family. Helena Andrade smiled proudly in the front row, next to Clara and other friends who had fought alongside them. Robert Sterling had tried one last move to destroy his son's reputation, but by this point, no one was listening anymore. The lawsuit for defamation had resulted in a substantial compensation that Valentina had donated entirely to the foundation. The original Sterling Company continued to operate, but under new management after Robert had been forced to resign by the board of directors. "There's something else," said Richard, returning to the microphone. In front of everyone, he knelt down. Valentina put her hand to her mouth, her eyes widened. "Valentina Mendez," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "you have taught me that true love is not measured by what we have, but by what we are willing to give. Will you marry me? For real this time, without pressures, without games. Just us two, and Leo building the family we have always dreamed of." "Yes," she shouted, before he even finished the question. "1,000 times yes!" When they kissed under the applause and shouts of joy from the crowd, they both knew that they had found something rare and precious, a love that had been tested by the worst storms and emerged even stronger. And Leo, running to hug them both, completed the perfect circle of the family that fate had conspired to create, proving that sometimes, when we least expect it, life gives us exactly what our heart has always known it deserved. In the audience, a reporter from the magazine that had published the first article about the scandal scribbled quickly in her notepad. From scandal to the altar, how true love conquered prejudice and manipulation. It would be, she knew, one of the most beautiful stories she had ever covered. And somewhere in the city, Robert Sterling read the article in his empty apartment, finally realizing that he had lost not only the battle, but the son he loved most for trying to control a heart that had always been free to love.